I'm Jane Hodson. I'm the EAE and AB Suite MCP Runtime Technical Lead at Unisys. In this video, I'll be showing you how to create and use an internal blob from AB Suite 7.0 for MCP Runtime. For those who want to store files in their DMS2 database, AB Suite 7.0 supports the DMS2 internal blob. DMS2 implemented external and internal blobs some time ago. AB Suite was able to implement support for external blobs, but not internal blobs. Now, in AB Suite 7.0, we have support for internal blobs. The feature supports the storage and retrieval of large objects in the user's database. These include MP4 files, Word documents, and MCP native files. I'm going to show you how to create an internal blob attribute in AB Suite. Then I will show you how to use the new methods on external blobs to store and retrieve files from an internal blob. The read method persists the contents of a file into the database as a blob, and the write method retrieves the blob as a file with the appropriate attributes. An internal blob is an attribute with the primitive property set to binary. When the primitive property is set to binary, model will set is persistent to yes, then disable that property and the store if present property. I'm going to use the cust ispec and sample to demonstrate how to create an internal blob. Right-click on the cust ispec, click on Add, click on Attribute. Give the attribute a name, and click on OK. Now go to the primitive property of the attribute and select binary. And that's how we create an internal blob. To be able to store and retrieve a file from an internal blob, we must have an external blob. We use the methods on the external blob to access the internal blob. To create an external blob, create an attribute and set its template property to binary file. Using the cust ispec and sample, we're going to create an external blob. This will be a local attribute. Right-click on the cust ispec. Select Add and select Attribute. We're going to find a template. Click on Framework, then click on Binary File. We're going to give it its own name. And there we've created an external blob. Storing a file to an internal blob is essentially a two-step process, but you do need to have created or read the database record before storing the file, then store that record afterwards. The first step is to assign a file to an external blob. This is done using the setPath method. A file name is assigned to the external blob through the parameter of the setPath method. The file name is delimited by quotes and is a valid MCP file name or file title. The second step is to store the file to the internal blob using the read method. Storing a file to an internal blob is a two-step process. Firstly, the path of the file to be stored must be set up on an external blob. We can use the external blob that we set up earlier. We specify the setPath method and we specify the file in the parameter. The second step is to store the file, but you may want to check whether the path is valid before doing so. We can use the glib.dbText built-in attribute. If glib.dbText is equal to glib.spaces, then we can go ahead and store the file. We use the external blob with the read method and specify the internal blob as the parameter. And that is how you store a file to an internal blob. Retrieving a file from an internal blob is also a two-step process, but you do need to have read the database record before attempting to retrieve the file. The first step is to assign a file to an external blob. This is done using the setPath method. The second step is to retrieve the file from the internal blob using the write method. Retrieving a file from an internal blob is also a two-step process. Firstly, the path of the location where the retrieved file will be written must be set up on an external blob. Use the setPath method. And specify the path in the parameter. The second step is to retrieve the file. Use the write method and specify the internal blob in the parameter. And that is how you retrieve a file from an internal blob. With the introduction of internal blobs in AB Suite 7.0, you now have the ability to store files in your database. Creating an internal blob is as simple as creating an attribute with the primitive set to binary. We have made it simple for you to store and retrieve your files from internal blobs using the methods on external blob. Thank you for taking the time to view this video.